Hello, welcome to Signal Noise. We're a Market Once podcast brought to you by ROI Rocket. My name is Brian Lamar. I'm your co-host along with Andrew DeCilles. Hello, sir.
Brian, how are you?
I'm doing very well. It's the holiday season. I'm excited to talk this topic today because this is the holiday season. We're going to talk a little bit of candy research, which is always fun.
Oh, so excited. So excited. I ate way too much candy this weekend.
Yeah, this is when I start gaining all the weight, right? We have as a guest someone I've known for quite a while, Craig Alter. He works in consumer insights at Perfetti Van Melle. Hello, Craig. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Brian. Good to see you. Good to see you again, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
Oh yeah, this is a great. I don't know about how you feel about it. You probably get this too much, but this is a timely topic for me. You know, Thanksgiving just ended, and we're into the holiday season, and there's lots of candy and treats, and I'm not sure if this is a busy time for you, or I'm assuming it is probably, but I don't know. Is there a seasonal aspect to your role? I'll just start off before we even get to the background about holiday season.
Yeah, I think with a lot of market research roles, it can get busy towards the end of the year as you're trying to use up budgets from the year. And then you
Yeah.
start planning work that will start in January with the next budget that'll come out. So I do find that kind of the end of the year, December, January can be a little heavy, which is a good thing for our job function. And we do have seasons within our own industry too. Obviously there's kind of the four big ones. You've got Valentine's, you've got Easter, you've got Halloween, you've got Christmas in terms of seasonal shopping for candy, gum, and mint. So it's busy for our brands, and from a kind of a seasonal shopping standpoint, we want to be where consumers are.
All right, before we get into the candy gum and mints, I'd love to maybe start off, go backwards. A little bit of your background. I know you've been in research for a while, but you've not been a researcher your entire career.
Yeah, I had a business degree at Purdue, and I started at Fidelity Investments and started learning the stock trading, mutual fund trading industry. And then I kind of bounced around to different like marketing roles, like your typical brand manager, and then also some finance accounting roles. And then during my time at Luxottica, I kind of found my way into market research. So I'd already had a career for 10 years or so. So it was one of those things where when I was in college, I never heard about market research, and it wasn't like a major, there wasn't anything to prepare you for this industry. And so I kind of found my way into it and thought, oh, that's interesting. And I do think it was nice to have some background in things like finance and marketing to kind of understand more of the holistic business environment that has helped, as I've been into a research role.
And Craig, I would love to hear more specifically, because it's almost a like funny cocktail hour question where we all, ask around, how did you accidentally land in marketing research? I think Brian's one of the only people I've met who, did this on purpose. So when you were at Luxottica, how exactly did you wind up in our little corner of the world?
Well, I had been initially I had been in a marketing role, but then was over in a finance role at Luxottica, and I just kind of heard about an opportunity for market research. And honestly, I didn't know the difference between quantitative and qualitative. I had to have that explained to me. But I thought, well, I think my goal was to kind of touch marketing again. Being in finance accounting roles, you're still a little removed from marketing. So I kind of wanted to get back closer to that just from a passion standpoint. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting, consumer insights and what drives people to make those decisions of what they ultimately buy, and working with marketing to try to figure things out. So I was like, yeah, I'll sign up for that. And I want to kind of learn that industry. But, I know today, if you're in college, a lot of schools offer classes in market research, and you could, I think, even graduate with a degree or even a master's in market research. But, it wasn't a thing that I was aware of when I was in school a long time ago. So I do think that a lot of people my age did kind of stumble upon market research, or can be different today if you're going through college now. But I think it's really good, regardless of what your role is in business, to have some experience in some different areas within organizations over your career. I think it makes you more well-rounded if you can get a sense for how do things work from a finance standpoint, how they work from a marketing standpoint or a sales standpoint. I think it's good to get all those perspectives.
While you were talking, it intrigues me. I think it's such an advantage for our industry to have such diverse backgrounds. And I don't think we have a ton of Purdue graduates in marketing research. It's known, I mean, it's a great school, known more for engineering and other disciplines, I think. But I've always kind of bashed our industry well the last few years because we're not in an accredited industry, right? You don't have to pass a test to be a market researcher. Anybody can kind of do it. And if you're doing a marketing role or a brand manager role at Luxottica, and you want to run a survey, you can do that. But I do think it's an advantage that we have other industries because ultimately we're trying to understand consumer behavior, and diversity is such a key to that. And we hire anybody that has any type of background, and hopefully that all kind of blends together to really improve our industry. So I'm not sure what kind of question it is there, but I think that we welcome you and people like you to our industry that have a little bit of a different background, especially that 10 years when you're in finance and accounting. Those are disciplines that are strengths for us. So let's get into Perfetti Van Melle. Maybe let's start off with I think locally here. We know you pretty well, but you mentioned candy, gum, and mints. What is Perfetti Van Melle?
Yeah, so we're based in Amsterdam, and the North American headquarters would be in Erlanger, Kentucky, where we have a manufacturing plant, and we produce a lot of airheads in that plant. Globally, we have brands such as Mentos, and Mentos is both gum and also mints. If you're older, I think the first thing you might think of is the rolls of mints, which some people refer to as candy. I think if you're younger, sometimes your headspace goes right to the gum that you've maybe seen because the mints are an older product of Mentos, and then they evolved into gum more recently. We have Trident, we have Dentine, long established brands that have been around for generations. We have Bubblicious gum, and then in the candy space, we have Airheads. Have a sub brand of Airheads Extremes, which is just a sub brand of Airheads that has different forms, and then we have Chupa Chups, which is primarily lollipops, and those are mostly global brands that touch a lot of continents. Really outside of Airheads, I think Airheads is predominantly a US brand. There is some sales in Canada, but I kind of think of Airheads as mostly a North American brand today. And then our other ones are truly global.
Well, first off, the world is missing out on Airheads. What a great product the world is missing out on.
I didn't know that was just a North American thing. My kids love Airheads. It was all the first candy eaten out of the Halloween bag was all the Airheads.
Yeah, kids that came to my house for Halloween got a lot of Airheads bars. So many of them were excited and said, "Oh, can I have more than one?" And I said, "Take as many as you want." So uh, yeah, it is a great product. We have a lot of great forms and flavors, and I think it's certainly has appeal with kids. That's kind of the sweet spot is younger consumers.
What's your favorite flavor of Airhead?
Well, I like our belts, which is like a softer than the bar. They're kind of strips belts. We have rainbow berry, which is terrific. So I like some of those. They're kind of multicolored. We have very berry, rainbow berry, soft Airheads belts.
Blue raspberry, Andrew, that's mine.
Yeah. I think there was and I may be hallucinating this, but is there a sour apple one?
There
Where
is.
my kids would have, because I don't, before I would have said like the blue raspberry, like Brian said, is one of my favorites, but my kids had a sour apple one that I tried that was really, really good.
Yeah, in the last couple of years, we launched 3 flavors within a sour kind of sub-brand of
Mm.
Airheads bars. So,
Okay.
I think of Airheads as mostly sweet and sour, and we
Mhm.
tried to dip our toes into a little more sour forward and came out with 3 SKUs, like you're remembering, of Airhead sour bars.
That makes me feel even better that it was new. So my questioning of it wasn't your so that was the original flavor, Andrew. What are you talking about? Okay, well, good. No, so how many are there, just like bowls of Airheads around headquarters, or do they pay you in candy? I mean, I just like working for a company that makes something like so ubiquitous. I can't relate to that at all, right? Because I've always been on the supplier side. And you mentioned as well, like, you used to be at Luxottica, right? Like I really can't see that well. Let me put on my glasses. You know, First of all, I do want to know if there's actually candy at headquarters. But the actual the actual question is, you get to work on these brands that a lot of people can relate to. And what's that experience like for you, just as a professional?
Yeah, I'll answer your first question. So there is plenty of candy at headquarters and gum and mints. They're in our front lobby when we walk in. I have a habit of after lunch every day, I've got to have something sweet. So there's always something sitting in the lobby and an assortment of Airheads and Mentos and a lot of things. I've got things on my desk. I have them in my drawers. You walk around and pretty much everybody has some candy gum and mints on their desk. So it is prevalent, and that can be a good or a bad thing. It's easily accessible. It's fun to be working for a company that has brands that are fun, and that is part of the one of our kind of goals we have when you think about creative and what message do you want to purvey to your consumers, is that we have fun brands. Airheads has probably done the best at really grabbing the fun experience, but we try to be fun with all of our brands, whether there's Chupa Chups lollipops or Mentos gum. So it's fun to have things that you can produce and see on the shelf that make consumers happy. I was at a healthcare role before this, and I really wanted to get back to something that felt more, hey, I see it on the shelf and I want to buy it. It's impulse, it's fun, and I can just put this in my cart, and it's kind of that CPG brand. So it's a lot more fun than than other industries, such as healthcare, and I think that's fun to be a part of.
That's you kind of mentioned what I'd love to talk to you about, and my guess is this is tough to research, and that's impulse buying. And I'd love you kind of to talk about. My guess is a lot of your products are bought at the store shelf, and as not at the store shelf, as we're checking out at the shelf at the checkout, right? And it's an impulse buy. Mom, I'm like, oh, and what's some of this? And I bet that is really hard to research. And so I'd love to talk about kind of how you study impulse buying in these categories, and is it different by retailer? And I could probably expand on 10 more questions about that, but impulse buying is kind of an interesting, unique topic.
Yeah, it is. And, we generally are found at both the back end of, retailers such as, a grocery store in the aisle, but then we're obviously at the front end. And, the front end in itself has changed so much in recent years with the emergence of self checkout. And, of course, you have a lot of people now buying groceries online and picking them up, which is a whole nother challenge. But so you kind of want to be prevalent in essence at checkout on an app or a website, when so consumers can see you when they're putting things in their basket, their virtual basket. So yeah, you do need to be, found at the front end, which is primarily, near the checkout where you see those impulse decisions. And, I think about there's all of these things you can do with marketing and with your advertising, and those are important. But if you're not able to be found when consumers are making the buying decision, that's ultimately what you have to fix. You have to be able to be found on the shelf, and so you have to have the distribution. So I just think that important that you're visible there, and you have your brands, and you have the right pack sizes, and you have all of the things consumers are considering when they're making an impulse decision. And I'll just add, channels are different too. I think of the C store as the whole thing is impulse. You're not really putting on your grocery list and going and walking the aisles of a convenience store. The whole store is impulse buy. And so regardless of whether you're up by the checkout or whether you're in a lane. And so we have to do, from a research standpoint, we've had to do like shopper journey work. So to understand strategies by channel, because a strategy is so different at a club store versus a C store. And we can't show up the same in every channel. We have to think about, do we have the right offerings? Do we have the right pack sizes, the right prices, the right brands, the right assortment of flavors? You really do have to have a strategy by channel to really properly, be there where the consumers, need you.
Do you do observational research? Do you do intercepts? Are those like key to kind of understanding this?
I think the best way to do like a shopper journey work is observational. In this day and age, everyone has a cell phone. They can record in the moment as they're at the aisle making those decisions, and they can talk about, how ultimately do they make decisions. Hey, I'm either planning on buying candy, gum, and mints, or it's a kind of an impulse thing. But regardless, I'm either at the front of the store or I'm at the back of the store, and I'm shopping, and what am I looking for? What are those cues? Am I looking for something new? Some new flavor? Does that catch my eye? Am I focused on price? Am I really just looking for a certain brand, or am I looking for a flavor? And so how that experience is, and ultimately what happens, is very different by channel. So, we we obviously are in drug and in convenience and in grocery and clubs and all the different typical channels. And I just think from a strategy shopper standpoint, it can be a very different experience.
One of the best advice I ever got as a researcher was from Chad Davis, and Chad Davis at the time worked with me at TNS, and now I think he's at Market Vision. He lives up in upstate Ohio. And when I was in the hair care team, he told me every weekend, I want you to go somewhere and observe people shopping for hair care and come up with an insight every week. And I learned so much as a researcher. If you ask, for example, and I'm sure you have examples like this, if you ask people that are buying shampoo, did you smell it before you bought it? And like 4% of people will say they smelled it. And then if you observe it, like 30% of people will say will actually lift up the shampoo, lift up the cap, smell it before they buy it. It's kind of an you just don't know you're doing it right. It's one of those purchases that you don't understand unless you're observing it. And so I still to this day I think about that.
Mhm.
And I have to do it in different ways because I don't have the opportunity to kind of stare at people. And I used to do it in baby care too. That was a little weird when I'm staring at moms buying diapers for children. So glad I'm not doing that anymore. That was a little weird. But do you find yourself kind of looking at people when you're out and like, oh, they bought some Mentos, interesting, and want to kind of stop them on the side of the street? Because I think I would want to do that.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that because it does feel like from a research standpoint, it does need to be qualitative in nature. It needs to be observational. I wouldn't want to personally field a quantitative survey trying to diagnose a shopper journey path, because I do
Yeah.
think there's a lot of things that happen that you wouldn't answer in an online survey. You do have to observe them. It does feel like a very in the moment observational type intercept or however you execute it. It is that type of thing to really get at those subconscious nuances that consumers do when they're making decisions.
I'd like to switch topics a little bit, and mostly because Andrew and I just recently, the most previous podcast we recorded was about artificial intelligence. It's kind of blew my mind a little bit. Everybody's talking about artificial intelligence and thinking about it. How does it impact my day to day job? What's the future look like? I'm curious, like a brand from a brand level. Do you think about artificial intelligence? Do you reach out to try to get information? Do you depend on people reaching out to you? How do you kind of think about it as it impacts the brand and your role?
I think I've been observing AI for a few years, kind of from a distance, and I wouldn't consider myself much of a user of AI. But I'm curious, and I'm trying to figure out where it fits within what I do, where it fits, in market research, where it fits in our business. I've dabbled in it just a little bit in terms of research. I've copy tested some creative utilizing AI. I think that there's pros and cons to that. Using AI to look at and review ads can be quick and cheap. So that's a pro. But I'm not sure I would trust it for a big campaign that we're going to invest a lot of money in and run, 30-second videos. And I'm not sure AI yet can really diagnose humor in ads. I'm skeptical of some of the things that consumers can really tell you about creative. I'm not sure AI is there yet at really assessing things like humor. So, but I think it has a place. And I think if you have a bunch of, 6-second social creatives, that might land on Instagram Reels or TikTok, and you want to understand, which 3 of 8 is working better for me from a branding standpoint, I just need to kind of have a hierarchy or a rank. I think it works great because it's quick and cheap. And I think it can assess some things like which ads work better for you than other ads. Again, I just would still lean on the traditional consumer feedback on, a big like 15-second, 30-second, yeah, something that you're going to invest a lot of money and have as a campaign. So, but honestly, outside of that, I haven't used AI much in what I do. I My assumption is that those on the supplier side, research companies, probably are using it more. They're maybe using it to help them with questionnaire development or help them boil down a bunch of open-end verbatims from a study or help them summarize focus groups. So my hunch is that, AI is being utilized by research suppliers a lot more than I'm personally using it on the corporate side.
That was a an incredibly nuanced answer for someone who said 3 times that you're just dabbling. So, th- th- thank you for that. In a very, I would say, like best practices application of the use cases. and the limitations based on what we've heard from others as well. I am curious if you could, just because we most of our clients are on the supplier side. It would be interesting for me to hear sort of like, what does a project look like for you, Craig? When you are interacting with an agency or when you are maybe doing a survey yourself, what is a qualitative study? Is that mostly what you're doing, or are you mostly doing quantitative work? Like, just kind of understanding what the day to day of your role looks like, I think would be really interesting to learn more about.
Yeah, it's very ad hoc in nature. So and I found this across, I've always been on the corporate side, and I found market research to be sitting on the corporate side mostly ad hoc in nature, where I might not know what tomorrow looks like. And then I might get a question from a marketing person that says, "Hey, do we know this?" And I might look and see, like, "Oh, we haven't done a study on this in years. Let's go and learn this." So it becomes a research project, and it can be the full gamut of all research things. It's a blend of qualitative and quantitative, and it's you name it in terms of research methodologies that I touch. Um, but it's not well planned out. So I don't have a calendar sitting in front of me today that tells me what research I'm going to work on in January. I just don't, and I just haven't historically throughout my career. It just things just kind of come up, and next week I might have 5 new projects, but I can't tell you what those are sitting here today. They just will arrive next week. And so most of my, I guess I'll call it internal customer is marketing, but I work with sales, I work with research and development, I work with customer planning. So there are a lot of departments within our organization that I may interact with in a research way, but a lot of times people are coming to me and I'm, I guess, reactive in that sense of, oh, we want to go and learn this for this initiative, and it could be something around new product development. Hey, we want to work on an innovation project together. Or it could just be we want to go and understand this about our base business. Maybe we don't, there's a learning gap and we just don't understand how consumers think about something. So that's probably a long answer to your question. That was a good question. And I tell people it's more ad hoc than planned out.
Yeah. Well, and it's definitely the same for us, right? In our world, where I have no idea what's about to come across my desk, and I think most of the space probably feels the same way that you do. At Perfetti, are you conducting most of the research yourself, or are you typically interfacing with an agency, or perhaps both? And if both, how do you make that decision?
Great question. Probably 95% of the research I'm doing, I'm working with a research supplier in conjunction on a project. I do very little DIY research. I am a department of one essentially here in managing North American insights for our brands. So I don't have really the time or the bandwidth to be programming a lot of things myself. There's a couple of tools that occasionally I'll do something that's kind of soup to nuts all by myself, but mostly I'm reaching out and getting RFPs, getting proposals with research companies. I say thankfully that I don't have a procurement team in the midst of things. It just makes it easier for me to make those decisions. I've worked in companies where I did have that kind of procurement arm to review contracts and kind of be in the mix, which can add time. I'm in a great situation here at Perfetti where the decision ultimately lies with me, and I can reach out to whoever and get, if I want to get do one RFP and proposal or multiple, it sits with me and who I think I want to go to and work with and who I think would be the best fit for this type of project. And you know, I I don't think cost is the only driver either, which is a nice thing. It's always in the mix of a consideration set when you're making a decision on who to work for, but it's not the primary driver, which I love that, again, I don't have someone, putting pressure, maybe like a procurement arm might in terms of low cost. So I can kind of work with whoever I want to. And I love working across a multitude of suppliers. I'm always curious about new ways of doing things and new methodologies, new approaches, new thinking. So I'll always keep my eyes open for who else might be doing something in a different way or something that feels interesting to me. not at all hesitant to kind of bring new suppliers into the fold. But I've got some favorite ones that I go back to for a lot of studies because I know they do a great job. And again, ultimately, that's the key more than like who's the lowest price. Like, who do I feel like does an amazing job with my projects?
Is it a tough balance to balance? I have a supplier that knows this industry really well and can help me. They're like an arm of Perfetti, right? They know the insights. They know they can read my mind almost in a perfect way. Versus, what's out there? Who's the new AI leveraging supplier? Who's got new methodologies that can maybe help with choice based or whatever that is, or helps me understand all the nuance in research? Is that a tough balance to stick with someone you know and trust and explore other opportunities?
That's a great question. I almost think that it's more important that someone knows my industry if I'm doing a qualitative project.
Hmm.
And I've kind of felt that way throughout my career. I almost feel like quantitative projects, I can almost go to numerous suppliers and don't really have to ramp them up much on my business. But if I'm looking for a moderator to lead a 90, 120-minute focus group session, I think it's really important. So I've tended to be more loyal to qualitative moderators throughout my career just because of what you just said, Brian, of like, oh, they know my business, they know our industry, they can articulate and talk our brands and they already know a lot of stuff about how consumers make decisions. So I'm a little hesitant to ramp up new moderators and ramp up new qual companies where I'm much more open to working with whoever if it's more of a quantitative project.
What do you find the mix to be of qual versus quant? And has that changed? Because I think you mentioned that you were in healthcare, you were also in eyewear, and now you're in a much more kind of like impulse buy type of industry in confectionery, right? Has that mix changed across those three very different spaces? And what does that look like for you today?
That's a great question, and I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. I almost feel like it's similar. If I had to guess, maybe 60% of my job is quant and 40% is qual, or 70-30. It's maybe skews a little bit more towards quant because there's
Okay.
just so many types of studies you could run with quant, less variability with qual. But I almost think it's been fairly consistent across the
Mm.
companies you mentioned that I've been doing research in. I worked for Tyson Foods too for a number of years in a research role, and I haven't seen a big divergent throughout changing industries in that mix of quant qual. There's still things where you're going to need to go get a qualitative read, and things are going to go and get a quantitative read, regardless, I feel like, of the industry.
Do you still think of research as qual versus quant? As and one of the things I do is study trends, and the newer, younger researchers that are coming into the industry, I don't think about it like we do that have been in research for a while, where there was a black line between qual and quant, right? I'm going to do focus groups, and then I'm going to do a quantitative test. I'm going to do some IDIs. I'm going to do another quantitative test. Where now I feel like at least the last 10 years or so, there's a trend towards I have a business problem and you better figure it out. It's partial, it might be quant, it might be qual. It's probably both at the same time. Do you think about that today?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you just said. I agree that early in my career, I did think of things very separately. It's either a qualitative project or a quantitative project, and I think I've personally used a lot more tools in the last 10 years that blend both, and I see a lot of value in that. I do a lot of product testing, but sometimes it's nice to also have, a qualitative read in conjunction with that. I think there's a lot of projects that I've touched in recent years that blends quant and qual together, and it's a research study. You've got an objective, you want to go out and learn something, and it's less important kind of the how. In fact, there's benefits to marrying both together. So I agree with what you said. I do think our industry looked very much at those as separate things years ago, and not so much anymore.
I want to go back to the AI because I've been thinking about it for the last couple of minutes. This might be a question for both of you, actually. It's a conversation that we can have, hopefully. When I'm thinking about AI and industries, one of the things that I think that AI will have a lot of trouble to solve, if ever, are nuance. And I think this industry is more heavily nuanced than others. because of the things you've said today. And this question came from, you said they may not pick up humor in ads, right? And when you're dealing with impulse purchases, emotional purchases around the holidays, you mentioned 4 holidays earlier, and humor and other subtleties in ads that are trying to drive this behavior of buyers and consumers. I'm curious if AI, this might be a torture test. I call it a torture test for AI is, can you pick up on the nuance to help Craig your job easier and Perfetti to leverage it? My guess is that's a really tough one to figure out, and that's why that you're not saying we're all in on AI, right? Because it can't do it yet, and it may not ever be able to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I can see where there's benefits, to help summarize, focus group sessions into some key bullet points,
Yeah.
rather than looking at hours of videotape and taking notes. And I can see where it can really help quickly summarize, a bunch of open-end verbatims. But again, I'm leveraging my research suppliers to do that heavy lifting on that part rather than myself doing it, just in how I kind of work. And sometimes we hear and we hear at conferences or we hear chatter in our industry about the hazards or risk of AI. Like, from a sample standpoint, we sure hope that AI or bots aren't taking our surveys. We hope that it's all humans really telling us what they think and showing us how they do things. So I agree with what you said, Brian. I do think our industry is very nuanced and there is a lot of subtleties. And just like when we were talking about shopper behavior, our industry maybe isn't like some industries that's going to be, and you could almost say, taken over by AI. It's probably best we keep it away in some sense and allow real consumers to be, giving us their insights. There's maybe some smart places we can leverage it just for speed and efficiency. Maybe it helps in, writing a survey or helps us guide ourselves, but I still think there's importance in the human interaction.
Well, and the reason that I'm so deep in thought, right, is that it really depends on more like the type of question that Craig is trying to answer than the space. And I think that, when we talk about like AI in general, we just, by the time that this episode comes out, our listeners will have already heard the episode with Sam Cohen of Fairgent, right? And that approach should be relatively universally applicable. I also, though, have the same gut rejection of, can a computer that doesn't have taste buds like help me pick a flavor, right?
Can a computer doesn't have hunger pangs and stress throughout the day? That's
Could,
what
could-
that's what they're dealing with.
well, and I wonder as well. I wish we had Sam was on so he could jump into this, but like, do you have any idea? Maybe Brian, you can answer this, or Craig, maybe you have looked into it and it's the reason why you don't use it. How do AIs do at simulating irrational behavior? And
Yeah.
not that, like, I don't buy candy on purpose. That's not true. But I think if I think about it, most of the time I don't mean to. Is like if I think about how much candy I buy over the course of a year in occasions, the quantity is all Halloween for me personally. But like the number of occasions, it's probably more impulse buys. So yeah, can an AI help with that? Certainly, I think anything foundational as far as, we have sour apple. Do we need sour apple extreme or lemon
Right.
mixed or, what have you?
I was thinking about ad testing. That's what kind of sparked the question was,
Just
can you differentiate 5 different ads when humor and all the nuance and subtleties around this category? I don't think it can.
I think it's tough. I think AI, based on the history of all the ads that have been pumped into it and it's learned, it kind of knows like where branding should be. Maybe it should be at the end of the spot.
Yeah.
There's certain foundational things like that. But I think it probably will always have a hard time at those subtleties and things such as humor. So yeah, it's an interesting discussion, around AI and where it can be used and should be used in our industry. I hear more of kind of the chatter around the watchouts, like, oh, we certainly don't want AI to be answering questions and giving us our research data. We don't want bots doing that. We got to make sure that's back to a whole sample discussion that you guys know well. So it's an interesting topic that all industries are are facing. You mentioned, impulse mix versus planned. I think it's a little more impulse with candy. Gum tends to be a little more planned. Like, hey, I know I'm a gum chewer, and my bottle or my pack's about out, so I'm putting it on the grocery list. And so gum tends to be maybe a little more skewed towards planned, and candy a little more impulse. And we see more brand loyalty with gum too. It's like,
Mhm.
hey, I'm a Trident person, or I'm a Mentos person, or I'm an extra person. And so there's less switching around with gum. Candy is so fragmented. There's so many brands, and we don't make chocolate. So our business is kind of, even within what we'll call the non-chocolate candy space, there's Nerds and Skittles and Sour Patch and Airheads. And so there's so many choices, and and consumers eat many brands and they choose amongst them. And so it's very fragmented, very differentiated, not a lot of loyalty. You see a little more loyalty in the gum and mint space, as they're also a little more planned out.
That's just so fun that that's space you get to work in all the time. Oh my gosh. And things, yeah, that I don't think of is like, okay, yeah, do I plan to buy gum? And it's interesting because I would have said like, no, I buy gum at the gas station or at the airport. And now if I think about it, I think I've ordered gum like on Amazon on purpose the last like 4 times that I purchased gum.
Yeah, my wife just ordered a bunch of bottles of Mentos gum on Amazon. It was delivered yesterday. So, it's sometimes on our list, and she just ordered a bunch
Yeah.
online and just had it shipped and arrived yesterday, a bunch of bottles of gum. So I did want to touch on, you mentioned product testing, and
Yeah.
uh, I want to touch on that just because like I do a lot of that, and that's probably the majority of the work that I do at Perfetti Van Melle is in that innovation workspace, which was one of the big reasons why I wanted to work where I work. It's because I love that type of research. Like, if you have to think about all the types of research you can do, and you can put maybe my excitement about brand tracking studies on a low end, and my excitement about innovation on the high end is I love anything in that kind of work stream around new product development. And I do a lot of what's called central location tests. So those are
Mhm.
those product tests where, I'm writing a questionnaire and consumers are tasting products and they're telling us what they think. You touched on that in the AI discussion. And, you're right. There's always going to be a place for that because AI is not going to be able to replicate, like, how does this taste? Is the
Yeah.
texture okay? Is the sour level okay? Is the flavor coming across as you would want it to, or are there off notes? So that type of consumer feedback that you get in product testing, we do a ton of, and that's the type of stuff I really love doing.
The central location test in my heart is my favorite research methodology. I
I
think
would
you can
say
accomplish so much. The design is complex and fun to come up with because you can obtain a lot of research objectives in it, and you can do quant and qual and CLT. And so I'm happy to hear you say that you like doing that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned objectives just now. Like it can accomplish multiple objectives. Sometimes we're doing product tests, CLTs for the a selling story. You know, we're past the point of being able to really make adjustments to the product from because we have a launch date coming up, and we've just missed that window. So it's all about a selling story, and do our products that we're getting ready to launch, how do they compare to other things that are in the market? And we need some data, some facts to put in front of a buyer to hopefully sell this in. So it's selling story as an objective. But then a
So
lot of times it's product refinement with research and development. Hey, we've got time. And if
mhm.
the texture's off, if the flavor's off, if there's things that we can go and refine and adjust. And sometimes if we have the time, we'll make changes in kind of with prototypes in kind of industrial trial runs and do another CLT. You hope you don't have to, but I've been around for long enough that that's happened many times where we do a couple of rounds of it till you get the product just right. So there is multiple objectives.
20 years ago, I was doing CLTs with Pepperidge Farm and Goldfish, and this really forced me to become a good researcher. Or I had to change industries because the clients were there. It's really quick research. You got to think on your feet really quickly. And we did moms, mostly moms, with their children at the same time in a CLT because we had one of the buyer there and the children. Are you doing things like that? Are you trying to interview the buyers? You said along with a lot of the users, which are going to be younger.
No, not at Perfetti. I haven't really done any research that I would call kind of that B2B, getting feedback from buyers and industry folks. It's all consumer when I worked for Tyson Foods, we did touch on both kind of B2C and B2B. So we were getting feedback from those that make decisions as buyers across different channels and kind of allowing them to be a part of research. But at Perfetti, it's just consumers. But you touched on children. I have done some things with teens. Our Chupa Chups Lollipop brand is very much geared towards children. Airheads, as well. And so we do sometimes dip into, kind of, I'll call it, 6 or 7 would probably be the lowest. But
Yeah.
getting feedback from kids is something that we do sometimes in addition to the parents.
Well, I know my kids would love to participate in that. So you'll have to on the side let me know who your agency is, so I
Right.
can figure out who's recruiting and get my son signed up for that panel. That's
It's fun. It is fun research.
as just like a totally fun question, and I don't know if you're even allowed to answer this, probably because it wouldn't have happened, but like, have you ever done a CLT for like a flavor concept or a product concept that just absolutely failed and like didn't see the light of day? And you can share, like we were gonna make, I don't know, durian fruit airheads, right? Like obviously that would be horrible. But like do you have any fun stories like that? Or maybe just something that maybe it went way better than you thought, or something just took a left turn. I'd love to hear a story like that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to flavor research, sometimes you can get a lot of excitement, internally in the organization in something that I call niche. I personally love mango. I personally love coconut. I love spicy things, but those tend to not do well across the mass. So there's always a segment of the population that loves it. But if you don't have, if you've only got 20% of the consumers saying, I love this, and the other 80 are like, yeah, I don't know. If it becomes polarizing, it's probably best not to launch that. So I just think when it comes to flavors, at the end of the day, your standard things that consumers are familiar with, like strawberry, for example, is going to be where a lot of the momentum and the breadth of favorability lies. Things that people are familiar with. We're always trying to dip our toe into things that are feel a little out of the mainstream. And it's interesting. I think our industry is starting to play around with that pairing of spice with fruit. So you're seeing a lot of mango tahini ideas when you go to
Mhm.
like trade shows and that are around flavors in the snacking industry. Spicy is definitely a trend. So you just have to weigh that. Is there merit in that maybe coming out as a seasonal thing, or is there a certain place for it to live? Maybe it's online, because you have to know at the end of the day that some of those a little more niche or newer flavor combos aren't going to appeal to everyone. They can have strong interest from a small section of the population.
Yeah, I just tried a tahine covered mango popsicle the other day,
Mhm.
and I was obsessed with it. And everyone else in my family thought that it was offensive that it had ever been made. So it
Yeah,
was,
very typical story. Yeah, I love
yeah.
mango tahini, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just so funny. That's the example you brought up. Because I was literally like this weekend, over the Thanksgiving weekend, my mom was like, I got this for you and your dad to try because you guys like stuff like this. Your dad thought it was really off-putting, and I loved it. And yeah, everyone else in my family just did not. So how does stuff like that happen? Like, does Tahine reach out to you guys to make a Tahine mango airhead? Do you reach out to them? Like, what does that look like when there's like a crossover or a team up?
No, I think it's in the flavor arena. You keep your eyes on trends. There's plenty of quantitative published reports out there on trends and what's showing up across different categories. You go to trade shows, we go to a show every year called Sweets and Snacks, and it's all the snack industry. It's chips and it's drinks, and it's also candy, gum, and mints, but it's things that you would consider snacks. And you just kind of see what's starting to show up at shows like that and what's showing up on shelf. So I do think we have to look outside of our own category and see. A lot of times you see trends show up in other snack categories first, like we'll say potato chip seems to be an early adopter of trends in the snacking category. So those are the types of things that you generally see is like, wow, I'm starting to see a lot of things as I walk the aisles of grocery stores, and we don't have anything in our portfolio that touches this. Maybe we should test a concept. Maybe we should even develop some product prototypes and get feedback after consumers tasted it. So maybe we need to dip our toes into certain areas that we're seeing like other categories, dip our toes in, whether it's, potato chips or chocolate or even, soft drinks. We've started kind of looking under the cover at things like coffee drinks and all the energy drinks that are proliferating, stores these days. You're seeing a lot of momentum with things like drinks in the drink space, a lot of innovation. So are there things happening with drinks like that, whether it's Red Bull or Celsius or even things going on at Starbucks that we could apply to our brands and our products? So a lot of it comes more from that.
That's fascinating.
That-
I've never thought there about like macro macro level flavor trends, right? Like, is there more pairing of spice with fruit this year than there was 3 years ago? Or maybe, I don't know what year it would have been, but like whenever vitamin waters started doing the like blueberry pomegranate acai flavor, right? Then it's like, oh, like maybe blueberry and pomegranate are like in now. And so that would be an example of like, okay, people are like eating more of this, drinking more of this. That's something that like fruit that can pair with candy. Maybe that's in it. Like I never thought of that before. That's so interesting.
Yeah, and it's more than flavors too. We're trying to keep our eyes on trends and what things are getting added to products. You see a lot of protein getting added to food and drinks. You're seeing caffeine getting added. So
Hmm.
it's kind of like added benefits. So are there added benefits that are showing up in other product categories, even outside of candy and gum, that maybe make sense for us to leverage? It could be a flavor, but it could also be some sort of, added benefit like vitamins, or it could be some, antioxidants or something that you're starting to see show up like in drinks they're giving a protein boost here, an energy boost here. Like, do we need that in something that we make, as an additional, offering? So you're looking at a lot of macro trends.
Like caffeine Mentos or remineralization mints in the gum, right? Stuff like that. How cool. How cool. Well, I know, Craig, thank you so much for all of your time. We are coming up here on top of the hour. Typically, the last thing that we ask of our guests is whether or not they have a rant. It can be something that is research related, something that is not research related. But is there anything that you just need to get off of your chest and kind of impart to our listeners as the Craig Alter rant?
Hmm. I'm not a big rant guy, and I'm usually pretty easily pleased. I don't have a ton of rants. I just think, as you guys know, like in our industry, we go to conferences and we hear a lot about AI, but we also right now a big topic is quality of sample. So, I just hope that our industry, as we move forward, is able to, really address those issues and relax everyone's fears, that are outside of the industry of like, is research really, what it says it is? Is it really meaningful? Is it really, the people who we try to recruit and we're trying to screen and we're trying to talk to? Is that really what's filtering through, our studies? So how is our industry dealing with some of the risk out there, such as, AI and bots taking surveys and sample quality and those sorts of themes that you hear that are big topics right now that you guys know well. So I have a personal rant. I just hope that as an industry, we're able to tackle those issues and really be able to address, so that I can address if I get questions from, a marketer that says like, hey, help. I'm reading this article about this potential thing that's troubling about the research industry. Like, what's your answer here? How are you and research suppliers dealing with this so that I don't have to deal with it?
that's the nicest rant ever. That I'm actually presenting the state of data quality at the University of Georgia, and one of the things I'm going to say, and that you may have been there and you heard this, is that our industry is growing. I think it's projected to be a $165 billion industry this year. Yet beneath this, we have this weird trifecta driven by AI disruption, which we talked about, unprecedented capital in our industry, which we see, but an existential data crisis. And that is just fascinating. And I would call it an existential data crisis You said it much nicer than I did. And so that was really, yes, hopefully we can solve that. That's a great rant, said very nicely. So I appreciate that. Well, Craig, thanks so much for coming on. Go out and buy some candy gum and mints. And if people want to reach out to you, can they reach you on LinkedIn?
Yes. I'm on LinkedIn and love making new connections and cutting the industry with folks. So thank you, Brian and Andrew, for having me on. Always great to talk to you.
All right. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Thank you, guys.